Madame Ife's salon was the pride of her small town. Located on the bustling main street, the salon was adorned with vibrant posters of women flaunting beautiful braids, weaves, and intricate hairstyles. The sweet aroma of hair products, mixed with the soft hum of gossip and laughter, filled the air, making it a haven for women who came from far and wide to experience Madame Ife's magic. The salon was always busy, with a line of customers eager to have their hair touched by the hands of the town's most famous hairstylist. For years, Madame Ife had been known to transform all types of hair, whether it was kinky, curly, thick, or thin, into stunning works of art. Her fingers moved like a master sculptor, weaving and twisting hair with precision that seemed almost supernatural. Women traveled from neighboring towns, often waiting for hours, just to have Madame Ife style their hair. They marveled at her ability to create intricate braids, silky weaves, and perfect cornrows that lasted for weeks without losing their form. But it wasn't just her skill that kept them coming back, there was something else, something intangible, that drew them in. To her loyal clients, Madame Ife was more than a hairstylist. She was a magician, a woman whose touch seemed to bring out their inner beauty. But beneath the surface of her thriving business, Madame Ife held a dark secret, one that no one could have ever imagined. It was not only her skill that made her salon a success, it was something far more sinister. Every day, after the last customer left and the salon grew quiet, Madame Ife would collect the strands of hair left behind. She swept the floor meticulously, gathering the discarded locks with a precision that hinted at the hidden ritual she performed each night. Madame Ife's reputation had not been built solely on her talent. Hidden from her clients and the public, there was a secret she had been guarding for years. Every evening, after the salon closed, she would take the hair she had collected during the day, stray strands that her customers had shed, and carefully place them in a small, ornate box. The hair, to her clients, was nothing more than waste, swept away at the end of their appointment. But to Madame Ife, each strand held power, an essence of the person who had shed it. The more hair she collected, the more her salon flourished, and the more successful her business became. But this was no coincidence. Many years ago, when Madame Ife was just starting out, she had been visited by an old herbalist who lived on the outskirts of town. The herbalist had taught her a dark secret, how to channel the energy of the hair she collected to enhance her business. Every night, she would take the hair and boil it in a special concoction of herbs and roots. As the steam rose from the pot, it filled her kitchen with an eerie, otherworldly scent, one that lingered long after the ritual was complete. Once the hair had been boiled, Madame Ife would use the water to cook her meals. The herbalist had been clear, consuming the water infused with the essence of the hair would strengthen her power. With each meal, Madame Ife felt her energy grow, and her business thrived more than ever. But the ritual wasn't without its consequences. While Madame Ife grew more successful, she also grew more dependent on the power that the hair provided. Her clients, unknowingly, were contributing to her growing influence. And the more she performed the ritual, the more her salon became the talk of the town. What started as a small act of desperation had now turned into a daily routine, one that Madame Ife couldn't imagine living without. But as with all things dark and mysterious, her actions would soon come back to haunt her. One hot afternoon, Funmi, one of Madame Ife's regular clients, walked into the salon. Funmi was known for her thick, natural hair that cascaded down her back, and she was one of Madame Ife's favorite customers. "Aya Ife, I need your magic today," Funmi said with a playful grin as she sat down in the salon chair. "I'm attending a wedding, and I have to be the center of attention." Madame Ife chuckled, running her fingers through Funmi's hair. "Don't worry, by the time I'm done, they'll think you're the bride." With that, Madame Ife got to work, her hands moving swiftly and gracefully through Funmi's hair. She braided with precision, pulling the strands tight and locking them into perfect rows. Funmi closed her eyes and relaxed, enjoying the feel of Madame Ife's skillful hands transforming her hair. When she was finished, Funmi looked in the mirror and gasped in delight. "Oh, Aya Ife, you've outdone yourself," she exclaimed, turning her head from side to side to admire the intricate braids. "It's beautiful." Madame Ife smiled, pleased with her work. But as Funmi stood up to leave, something unexpected happened. Funmi began to pick up the stray hairs that had fallen to the floor during the styling. Madame Ife's heart skipped a beat, and her smile faltered. "Oh, Funmi, don't worry about that," Madame Ife said quickly, trying to sound casual. "I'll sweep it up for you." Funmi shook her head. No, Aya Ife. I've had it's bad luck to leave your hair behind. I always like to take it with me." Madame Ife's pulse quickened. "Please, leave it," she said, her voice a little too sharp. "I insist." But Funmi, oblivious to the growing panic in Madame Ife's eyes, gathered the hair into a small bag and smiled warmly. "Don't worry, Aya Ife. It's just a little hair." Madame Ife could barely contain her fear. She watched helplessly as Funmi left the salon with her hair in hand. Little did Funmi know, she had just undone years of Madame Ife's carefully guarded ritual, and the consequences were about to unfold. As soon as Funmi left the salon, Madame Ife's mind raced with panic. She rushed to close the shop early and hurried home, her thoughts consumed by the terrifying implications of what had just happened. Her heart pounded in her chest as she grabbed her phone and dialed the herbalist number with trembling fingers. The herbalist answered after a few rings, his voice calm and steady. "Madame Ife, what is it? Why do you sound so shaken?" "I made a mistake," Madame Ife stammered. "A client took her hair. She gathered it all up and took it with her. What do I do?" There was a long, ominous pause on the other end of the line. When the herbalist finally spoke, his voice was heavy with warning. "I told you, didn't I? No one must take their hair from your shop. The power you've been feeding on comes from those strands. Once someone takes it away, they take back the energy that you've siphoned from them." Madame Ife's blood ran cold. "But what can I do? Is there a way to fix it?" The herbalist sighed deeply. "There is no remedy, Madame Ife. The damage has already been done. You must prepare yourself, the consequences will come, and they will not be kind." Madame Ife's knees buckled as she sat down in her kitchen, her mind reeling. She had built her entire livelihood on the ritual the herbalist had taught her. How could one small mistake undo everything she had worked for? But as the herbalist's words echoed in her mind, a deep sense of dread settled over her. She realized that her success had always come with a price she was now about to pay. Before I continue, this is a plea to you, my awesome viewers who haven't subscribed to my channel, to please be a part of my growth. I'm begging you click on that subscribe button please, and if you're a returning subscriber, hey, welcome back. I'm so happy to have you here, thank you so much. That night, Madame Ife lay in bed, unable to sleep. Her mind was consumed with thoughts of the ritual she had been performing for years and the dark secret she had been keeping. What would happen now that Funmi had taken her hair? Would her business fail? Would her power weaken? As she tossed and turned, a strange sensation began to spread through her hands. It started as a dull ache but quickly intensified. Her fingers began to swell, growing larger and larger until they were grotesquely misshapen. Madame Ife gasped in horror as she looked at her hands. They were no longer the delicate, graceful hands of a skilled hairstylist. They had become monstrous, swollen beyond recognition. She tried to move her fingers, but the pain was unbearable. Her once skilled hands, the hands that had created magic with every touch, were now useless. Panic surged through her as she clutched her hands, tears streaming down her face. In the days that followed, the situation only worsened. The swelling spread, and soon her entire body was affected. Her skin began to itch and burn, and strange, festering sores appeared on her arms and legs. But the worst was yet to come. One morning, as Madame Ife sat in her kitchen, desperately trying to ignore the pain, she noticed something wriggling beneath the skin of her hands. At first, she thought she was imagining it, but as the sensation grew stronger, she looked down in horror to see maggots crawling out from beneath her skin. Madame Ife screamed in terror, shaking her hands and trying to brush the maggots away, but they kept coming, squirming and writhing as they devoured her flesh. She collapsed to the floor, her body shaking with uncontrollable sobs. The curse had begun. Word of Madame Ife's condition spread quickly through the town. The once bustling salon, known for its vibrant atmosphere and expertly crafted hairstyles, became eerily silent. The women who had once flocked to Madame Ife's chair now avoided the salon altogether, whispering among themselves about the strange illness that had befallen the famous hairstylist. Some said it was a punishment from the gods, others claimed it was witchcraft, but no one truly knew the full extent of the dark ritual that Madame Ife had been performing for years. All they knew was that the once flourishing business was now deserted, and the woman who had once been the pride of the town was now suffering in isolation. Madame Ife could no longer work. Her hands, once her most prized possession, were now twisted and deformed, making it impossible for her to style hair. The maggots that had appeared beneath her skin continued to torment her, leaving her body weak and covered in sores. She could barely stand, let alone weave the intricate styles that had made her famous. Desperate for help, Madame Ife reached out to the herbalist once more, hoping for a cure. But when she called, the herbalist's voice was cold and distant. "I warned you," he said. "I told you there would be consequences. You played with forces you didn't fully understand, and now you must pay the price. There is nothing I can do for you now." Madame Ife hung up the phone, her heart heavy with despair. She had built her life on a lie, using dark magic to fuel her success. Now, everything she had worked for was crumbling around her, and there was no one who could save her. As the days turned into weeks, Madame Ife's condition worsened. Her once beautiful hands were now rotting, and the maggots that infested her body showed no sign of stopping. The salon remained empty, a silent reminder of the price she had paid for her ambition. One fateful afternoon, Femi returned to the salon, unaware of the nightmare that had unfolded since her last visit. She had been traveling for weeks and had only just heard whispers about Madame Ife's strange illness. Curious and concerned, she decided to visit the salon to see if the rumors were true. When she arrived, the sight that greeted her was shocking. The once vibrant salon was now dark and empty, the chairs gathering dust and the mirrors covered in grime. Funmi called out, "Aya Ife, are you here?" There was no answer. She hesitated at the entrance, feeling a sense of unease. Slowly, she made her way through the salon, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. As she approached the back room, she heard a faint sound, a soft whimpering that sent chills down her spine. Funmi opened the door to find Madame Ife huddled in a corner, her body hunched over in pain. Her hands, once so delicate and skillful, were now grotesque and rotting, covered in festering sores and crawling with maggots. Funmi gasped in horror, unable to believe what she was seeing. "Aya Ife, what happened to you?" Funmi whispered, her voice trembling. Madame Ife looked up at her with hollow, sunken eyes. Her face was gaunt, her skin pale and stretched tight over her bones. She tried to speak, but her voice was weak and strained. "It's too late for me," she said, her words barely audible. "The curse, it's taken everything from me." Funmi's heart ached with sympathy. She reached out to help Madame Ife, but the older woman recoiled, shaking her head. "Don't touch me," Madame Ife warned. "It's not safe." Tears filled Funmi's eyes as she watched the woman who had once been so strong and vibrant now reduced to a shell of her former self. There must be something we can do, Femi said. There has to be a way to help you. But Madame Ife only shook her head, her eyes filled with regret. This is my punishment, she whispered. For playing with forces I should have left alone. After her encounter with Madame Ife, Femi couldn't shake the image of the woman's decaying body from her mind. She needed answers. How had it come to this? What had Madame Ife done to deserve such a fate? Determined to find out the truth, Femi sought out the herbalist who had once been close to Madame Ife. He was a reclusive man who lived on the outskirts of town, and his knowledge of the supernatural was well known, though most people avoided him. When Femi arrived at the herbalist's small, ramshackle house, she hesitated at the door. The air around the house felt heavy, almost oppressive, but she pushed the feeling aside and knocked. The door creaked open, and the herbalist stood before her, his eyes dark and unreadable. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low. "I need to know what happened to Madame Ife," Femi said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "She's dying, and I need to know why." The herbalist sighed and stepped aside, allowing Femi to enter. Inside, the house was dimly lit, filled with strange herbs and dried plants hanging from the ceiling. The smell of incense filled the air, thick and heady. The herbalist sat down at a small wooden table and gestured for Femi to join him. "Madame Ife's fate was sealed long ago," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "She sought power, and I gave her the means to obtain it. But power always comes with a price." He explained how he had taught Madame Ife a ritual, one that involved collecting the hair of her clients and using it to enhance her own success. The hair, he said, held the energy of the people who had shed it, and by consuming that energy, Madame Ife had been able to grow her business and attract more clients. But the ritual was dangerous, the herbalist continued. It was never meant to be used for personal gain. Once someone takes their hair back, the power is broken, and the person who performed the ritual suffers the consequences. Femi's heart sank as she realized the full extent of what had happened. "So when I took my hair back?" The herbalist nodded. "You unknowingly broke the spell. And now, Madame Ife is paying the price." Madame Ife's condition continued to deteriorate, and it became clear that she had little time left. The salon, once the heart of the town, was now a desolate, abandoned place. The women who had once flocked to Madame Ife's chair no longer spoke of her, and the town had moved on, leaving her behind. Femi, feeling responsible for what had happened, visited Madame Ife every day. She brought food, though Madame Ife could barely eat, and she sat with her, listening to her stories of the past, of how she had once dreamed of being the best hairstylist in the country, of how she had been tempted by the promise of power, and of how it had all gone wrong. "I thought I was invincible," Madame Ife said one day, her voice raspy and weak. "I thought I could have it all without paying the price. But now, I see that I was wrong." Femi sat beside her, holding her hand gently, despite the sores that covered it. "You were only trying to build a life for yourself," Femi said softly. "I don't think anyone could blame you for that." But Madame Ife shook her head. "No," she whispered. "I knew what I was doing. I knew the risks, and I ignored them. Now I have to face the consequences." As the days passed, Madame Ife grew weaker and weaker. The maggots continued to eat away at her flesh, and her body was racked with pain. Femi stayed by her side, refusing to leave her alone in her final moments. One evening, as the sun set over the town, casting a warm golden light through the windows of the salon, Madame Ife took her final breath. Femi sat beside her, holding her hand, tears streaming down her face. Madame Ife had been many things: ambitious, talented, and deeply flawed. But in the end, she had been human, like everyone else, and she had paid the ultimate price for her choices. After Madame Ife's death, the town was left with a sense of unease. The once thriving salon was now a haunted place, filled with memories of a woman who had sought greatness but had been undone by her own ambition. The story of Madame Ife became a cautionary tale, passed down from generation to generation. Parents told their children about the dangers of greed and the consequences of seeking power at the expense of others. The women of the town, who had once admired Madame Ife's skill and success, now spoke of her with a mixture of sadness and regret. Funmi, who had been at the center of the story, found herself forever changed by the experience. She couldn't shake the feeling of guilt, though she knew that what had happened had been beyond her control. She had simply taken her hair, unaware of the dark magic that had been woven into it. In time, the town moved on, and new hairstylists opened their doors, but none of them ever reached the heights that Madame Ife had. Her legacy, though tainted by tragedy, remained in the hearts and minds of the people. Years later, when Funmi told her own children about Madame Ife, she spoke not just of the magic and the mystery, but of the lessons that had been learned. Be careful what you wish for, she would say. Because sometimes, the price is higher than you can ever imagine. And so, the tale of Madame Ife's salon lived on, a reminder that ambition, unchecked by morality, can lead to ruin, and that the choices we make, no matter how small, can have consequences that ripple far beyond what we ever intended. Please, if you haven't subscribed, please click on that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, so when I post more interesting stories you'll be the first to get them. I really appreciate you. I do not take your support for granted. See you in my next video. Bye bye.